Hey, good morning, Tina. Thanks for tuning in. I'm giving everybody a minute. I just tuned in a little bit early myself just to test and make sure everything is working okay. Hi, Joyce. I'm great, thank you. It's a warm day. Hi, Samina. Thank you for tuning in. We'll give everybody, hi, Pam. Hi, Bobby. How's it going in Wisconsin? Hi, Millie from Naples. Is that Naples, Florida or Naples, Italy? Okay, well, we'll give everybody a minute. Hi, Uta. How are you? We'll give people a few minutes to get in. We're back to hot weather here. I'll give you my Serger Savvy weather report while we're waiting for people to tune in. We had beautiful weather. Oh, Millie, you're in Florida. Okay. Oh, you said you had a bunch of rain in Wisconsin. Yeah, we had beautiful weather last week. It was like high 70s, low 80s. Hi from Topeka. Hi, Cecilia. Um, and now it's kind of gotten hot and humid again. I'm great, thank you. Oh, like the shirt behind. That's my triangulate the T, Pam, and that's the one that I did last month, doing pin tucks on knit fabrics, and that's a rayon knit, so it's very stretchy and unstable. Nancy, you say it's hot in Phoenix. I'll bet it's hot in Phoenix. I'll be out there in November. I'll be there November 13th, 14th, 15th. So, yeah, that one I did. The rayon is very thin, very lightweight, and very unmanageable. And if you tune into the July Serger Savvy, I showed you how to use the sticky wash away stabilizer. And you don't even have to adjust your differential feed when you do those pin tucks. It's a really cool little trick. And it works great. And you could even use it on woven fabric, say if you're doing something on the bias grain line or just off grain a little bit where you might get some distortion or stretching. But it's just a cool thing. When I did the July Serger Savvy, I did that on a Saturday and I didn't announce it. I know you all had heard that when I went to do my May Serger Savvy, my old computer was no longer able to be updated to work with the software I need for multiple cameras in this presentation. So I had to get a new one, and I had tried in May and June to do a Serger Savvy, and that's when I realized it was the computer. It wasn't anything I was really doing wrong, which is kind of a miracle. Oh yeah, Pam, go ahead. If you have any questions about that technique, let me know. But anyway, so I got a new desktop. This is actually the one in my studio that I'm working on now is actually nicer than the one that I have in my office. But that's okay. I love it. And it works great with this software, and that's all I care about. So let's give everybody another minute or so. Today we're going to be talking about seam allowances and how you get accurate seam allowances. And I know I've done 2 Serger tip clips on it in YouTube, but I still get a lot of questions about it. And, you know, it is a little bit of an abstract concept to wrap your head around. But I think once you kind of get you kind of figure out the whys behind how you gauge it, then you'll be good to go and you'll feel confident about making sure you're doing the right measurements. And that's really important, particularly for garment sewing, but also any kind of sewing. If you have to fit one piece into another and you overshoot how much you've cut off, there's no getting that piece back onto your fabric on a serger. So being able to gauge your seam allowances correctly, no matter whether you're using a 4-thread overlock, a 3-thread wide, 3-thread narrow, you'll be able to do it. Even if you were doing something like, say, even a rolled hem that you're going to encase in a French seam, you want to be sure that you're on the money as far as the correct allowance goes. So I am recording, so I can put that little sign away. But I'll do my usual housekeeping on these YouTube Lives. And as you know, I do not work for Bernina, but I am a Bernina ambassador. And if you're thinking about purchasing a new machine or software, any purchase over $1,000, before you put any money down with your dealer, contact me by email at gail@gailpatrice.com, and I can send you a thank you from Bernina of America. And this is only good in the US because it is Bernina of America. But it's a $100 rebate check that they will send you as a thank you for making the purchase that you did, but also for supporting me on YouTube and everything else. So, and this is a check. It's not a gift certificate for more merchandise. It takes probably, I would say, 6 weeks to process, but you will receive that. So it's a nice $100 will buy you some more fabric. You can go on to gailpatrice.com and spend some money, whatever you want to do. So anyway, okay, it's about 6 minutes after the hour, so I think we'll be good to go. So I did post a picture yesterday as a little teaser for this Serger Savvy about using a 4-thread overlock. And let's take a look at that up close and talk about that. Okay, so this was a 5/8 inch seam allowance that I stitched with a 4-thread overlock stitch. But as you can see, it measures, let me get my ruler exactly on that left needle stitching line. It measures about 3/16 of an inch, maybe just a hair shy of that. But that was stitched with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. So how does that work? Let me go back to me for a second. When you're using overlock, you don't always have to cut off your seam allowance or trim off any of the fabric on the edge, but typically when you're working with garments or anything like that, if it had a 5/8 inch seam allowance or even a 1/2 inch, you would probably trim off some. Maybe for a narrower seam allowance, like a 1/4 inch, you might not have to trim off any, and we'll talk about that too. So how does something that measures 3/16 of an inch stitched still equal a 5/8 inch seam allowance? And this, I think, is the thing that gets people hung up, and they can't quite get their heads wrapped around the whole concept. So what I'm going to do today is, the first one that I'm going to show you on the machine is a 5/8 inch seam allowance, the same one that you saw on the table, with a 4-thread overlock stitch. Now with the 4-thread overlock, you've got your left and right needles in, along with the upper and lower loopers. So you'll always have the upper and lower loopers threaded for this type of stitching. But it's the left needle position that is a thing that you want to get right on the money on that 5/8 inch mark from the raw edge of the fabric. So I'm going to go to the table. I'm going to pull this away again. And I had this one over on the machine to start with, but I think it would be helpful to show you up close too. All right. So you can see I have labeled this. I am using my left needle. Now, even though it's a 4-thread overlock stitch with the right needle in, ignore the right needle because it doesn't matter. All that matters is the position of your left needle. And you can see at the top, I just made a little mark with a pen. Now, this is done with a ballpoint pen so that it shows up on the camera. Would I use a ballpoint pen on my project? No, I'd probably use a friction pen or a chalk or something that I can get rid of easily. But what I've done is I have made that little tick mark at the top 5/8 of an inch from the edge of the fabric. And so let's give that a measure just to be sure that I am correct. And you can see, yes, it is 5/8 of an inch. So that is where I am going to put my left needle, because in a 4-thread overlock or a 3-thread wide with the left needle in, that is the one that's going to form the seam. Now, let me just go back to me for a second. Okay, now the cutting width or the stitch width doesn't necessarily make a difference as long as your needle is in the right place, that it's 5/8 of an inch from the edge of the raw edge of your fabric that you're stitching. So whether you use a 9mm wide stitch, which I will be using, maybe I'll just bring that down a little bit. Maybe I'll bring it down to about 7.5 just for the heck of it, because that's the typical maximum stitch width that a lot of machines have. So whether you have it on 9, 7.5, 6.0 for a 1/4 inch seam, or that width of the stitch, it doesn't matter as long as your needle is stitching 5/8 of an inch from the raw edge of the fabric. So let's go to the machine and take a look at how to position this. And I brought my camera in really close because I want you to be able to see how I position my needles. I'm going to raise the presser foot. Again, I am set up for a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Let me make sure. Now, the beginning edge is not going to be cut off, but that's okay because this is just a sample. So I am going to align my left needle. Let me make sure you can see that. I've got my clear foot on. I'm putting that left needle right in on that 5/8 inch mark, just like where I am now. And I'm going to put my presser foot down. Now, obviously, I'm past where the knife is, but that doesn't matter because it'll trim off some more. And then I'm going to show you what it looks like when it's all stitched. So I'll put this, and actually I think this might be better that it isn't cutting off the beginning, because I think it'll be an easier concept for you to understand. So let's give this a stitch. I have all of my tensions on the default setting. My stitch length is 2.5. This is just a quilting weight cotton. It's just scraps of fabric that I use. Is 1.0. And let me see if I can show you that. There's my setup. 4-thread overlock. It's stitch number 1. I have my needle up. Stitch length 2.5. Differential feed 1. So okay, so let's give this a go. Now, I didn't put my seam allowance or my seam guide on right now because I know if you don't have a Bernina, you don't have this. But there are other seam guides that are available for that. So let's see how this goes. Now that the knife is trimming, that is exactly what I am watching. I am no longer watching where the needles are, because if I'm trimming off a consistent amount from the edge, I'm still 5/8 of an inch from that original edge on the fabric. So let's see. Okay, now I'm going to go back to the camera. And what I'm going to do is I am going to, let me just show you what I did. I have my sample all stitched, but I pulled out from the trim bin what was trimmed off from the fabric. So let me get this oriented on the table camera for you. I'm going to pull this forward a little bit. I'm a little bit far away from my short arms. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm lining up what I trimmed off with the fabric that is already stitched. Let me bring this forward. So here we are, we're stitched. Let's measure this. This has to go right up against the fabric. And you can see, I think I've got it in just a smidge too far. Hang on a second. Okay, so you can see that is still 5/8 of an inch, even though I trimmed off this amount. And you can see the fabric under here that was beyond where the knife is, that did not get trimmed off. It got folded under the stitch. So, but this is still my 5/8 inch seam allowance, even though without this, it's narrower. It's about 3/16 of an inch. So that is with a 5/8 inch seam allowance using a 4-thread overlock with the left needle. Let me just see. Are there any questions about that so far? Is that clear as mud for all of you, or does anyone need a little bit more information on that? Okay, now let's do a 3/8 inch seam allowance with the left needle in. Again, what we're going to do is we're going to cut off a little bit more than this off the edge of the fabric. And you'll see that it will measure 3/8 of an inch. All right, so I'm going to take out, I don't want to mix up my little scraps. I'm going to throw those out of the trim bin. So the next one that we're going to do is 3/8 of an inch with the left needle. And I know it looks backwards. I'm mirror imaged on this. Sorry about that. Okay, so let me get my edges together nice and even. And I'm still doing a 4-thread overlock, but now let me just show you. I should have done this before I get off of this. This mark is 3/8 of an inch from the edge, just like this. You can see 3/8 of an inch. Alrighty? Does that make sense for everybody? Is that good? Okay, so let's go to the machine. And I brought the camera in kind of over where the needles are, just so that you would be able to see where it is. Now, if I wanted to trim off the edge right from the get-go on this, let me just go back to me for a second. If I wanted to trim this off right at the beginning edge, which I typically would do, I don't want that fold under. I just did that as a quick, let me show you how to position this. What I would do is I would use those little indicator ridges, those bumps that are on the front of the presser foot. And I'm going to align that 3/8 of an inch mark with the one that is second from the right, because that is aligned with my left needle. And I know it's a little bit harder to see on a clear foot. Let me see if I can, I think I might have to lighten up my, oh, actually you can see them. So let me just grab a stiletto here. Okay, so this bump, this indicator ridge is my right needle. This one is my left needle. This is the one that I want to align my mark on the fabric to, because this is aligned with that left overlock needle. So I'm going to get that right in line with it here, get it under the presser foot, and actually you can see that Bernina added, I think you can see it, yeah, you can see these little lines right here. If I've got that aligned with this line, which I do, I can trim off right from the start of my fabric. All right, so let's go with this, and you're going to see just a little bit. It's going to be more than skimming the whiskers, but it's not going to be as wide a trim as the first sample was. Actually, it's almost exactly the width of my knife that I'm trimming off. So again, if I keep my fabric edge even with this edge of the knife, I should be good to go. Let me see if I should lighten that up maybe a hair. I think that's better. Okay. Get my edges even. Okay, so now I did not adjust the width of the stitch at all, but I'm going to grab one of my little pieces that I trimmed off and we'll put that against the fabric again. I'll go to the table camera. I love having this fabric as a background. I think it's so pretty. Okay, so now I stitched at 3/8 of an inch. Here is what I trimmed off. Right here. So let's give this a measure. I want to turn my ruler correctly. You can see 3/8 of an inch. Just right. Whoops, I'm a little bit off there. So you can see that is 3/8 of an inch. And so those are both with the left needle, and it's only with a 4-thread overlock or a 3-thread wide where you would take out the right needle. Don't even pay attention to that at all when you've got your left needle in. The left needle is what forms the seam for both of these. Here's the 5/8 one where I trimmed off a little bit more. But it is the left needle that forms the seam, and that is the more important one to pay attention to. The right needle is there just strictly for a secure stitch. There's your 3/8. They look exactly the same from the outside, and they even look the same. Let's put them side by side here, or one on top of the other. Let me trim off this extra thread. Let's put them on top of each other, and you can see they look exactly the same, but we've used 2 different seam allowances on that. Let me get that over so that it's aligned correctly. You can see they're the exact same stitch. It was just a matter of trimming off this much, or the first one I trimmed off a little bit more. Anyone kind of lost or not quite sure of that? Because I really want you to get this. I know when I did the first and the second tip clips on seam allowance and I drew lines all the way down the fabric, I got a bunch of comments saying, but I don't want to have to draw lines all over my pattern or all over my fabric pieces to be exactly on the money. No, you don't have to do it. It's just a matter of getting your needle positioned right at the beginning. Then all you have to watch is the knife and making sure you're trimming off a very consistent amount of fabric from that edge. Hi, Adele from Atlanta. Good. I'm glad you joined us. Thanks. If you missed the beginning of this, Adele, it's recorded and it'll be on my YouTube channel later today. So anyway, that is with my left needle in. Now I'm going to switch to a 3-thread narrow stitch, and actually the top that I'm wearing right now I made with a 3-thread narrow overlock stitch for the seaming. I used my right needle, upper and lower loopers threaded, and it worked out perfectly. I use a 3-thread narrow on knits quite frequently. A 3-thread stitch, as you know, is a little bit stretchier than a 4-thread overlock. You could definitely use a 4-thread overlock on knits, but I kind of like that little bit of extra give. I don't wear my clothes super tight or anything. Those days are gone, sadly. But anyway, I still like a little bit of extra give on them because I do like a close fit on the shoulders, the back, you know, the whole top thing. But anyway, so I like that extra give of the 3-thread overlock. So let me go to my machine. And now what I'm going to do is I am going to cut my left needle thread and remove the left needle. So what does that do automatically to my stitch? It narrows it down. And how much does it narrow it down by? Let's take a look. The distance between the two needles, I think I have to go this way because my rule won't fit. It's about 1/8 of an inch. So it's automatically going to narrow that stitch down from the one you saw on the table camera. It's going to be about 1/8 inch narrower for a stitch. So I'll cut that left needle thread. Let me just stitch out that thread. You can pull it out too, it doesn't matter. It's out. Okay, so now, and I'm going to remove the left needle. Okay, put that off to the side. I can put it in my little needle garden in there. Now I do have my stitch finger engaged for this. If I wanted an even narrower stitch, I could have taken out the stitch finger, but I did want a little bit of width to this. Oh, Bobby says she loves to practice when testing to get her eye set up on the cutoff part. Exactly right, Bobby. And that is something that is so good for sewers to know. It's the same thing as your sewing machine. You know how they always say just, you know, watch the foot, don't watch the needle, and watch your fabric. The needle knows what it's doing. But if you get yourself trained to on your serger in overlock mode to watch how much is being cut off, and just making sure that strip that is cut off is very consistent from beginning to end, you'll be golden. You'll have it, and you'll be very accurate on that. Okay, so I am going to do 3/8 of an inch. Where did my 5/8 of an inch one go? Okay, let's do the 5/8 one first. Okay, so let me show you that. Get that out of the way. Okay, this is with my right needle. I'm creating a 5/8 inch seam allowance, and let's give that a quick measure. Yep, exactly 5/8. But this is going to be with just the right needle. So now I'm going to align this mark with the indicator ridge on the toe of the foot that is for the right needle. So let's go over to that now. Okay. Now, here's my indicator ridge for the right needle. You can see the little line behind it, which is super, super handy and makes it very easy to be accurate. So I'm going to align that here because I want to trim off right from the beginning. If I didn't want to trim off any at all, I could bring it right up to the needle. But just for this demo, I want to show that. So let's give this a go. And now I'm looking at where the edge of the fabric is, but I'm going to keep that mark aligned with my right needle line. And you can see that it is trimming off a pretty fair amount again for 5/8 of an inch. okay, you'll see a narrower stitch. Let me trim off the excess thread. And I've got my scrap that I cut off. So let's go over to the table. Okay, so here it is. You can see that compared to the 5/8 inch seam allowance with the left needle, it's considerably narrower, okay? You can see how the right needle on the 4 thread aligns with the right needle on the 3 thread narrow. So let's put our scrap of fabric back. I have both of layers here for that 5/8 inch test. I think this is aligned correctly. There we go. 5/8 of an inch. Exactly. Let me go to my... Okay, so you can see it's a narrower stitch. And this is kind of the seam width that I do like on knits. If I'm doing something with woven fabric, a garment particularly, or even anything that requires a strong seam and some reinforcement, like a tote bag, if I'm doing something with a woven fabric for a garment, any of when I'm inserting a zipper, I use a 4 thread overlock because I like the extra strength of the 2 needle threads. That right needle basically just reinforces the left needle. So let's open this up. It looks exactly the same from the outside, just narrower for the stitching line on the inside. Okay, so that is my 5/8 inch seam allowance with a 3 thread narrow. Now let's do a 3/8 inch seam allowance. I'm going to put this with this so I don't mix it up. So this one, 3/8, I've marked 3/8 from the edge of the fabric. I didn't cut these exactly even, but that's no big deal because I'm stitching on this line. So this is going to be a 3/8 inch seam allowance using just the right needle and my loopers. Let's go to the machine. Again, I am going to align this mark with, get that right on the money. I've aligned that right with the line and the indicator ridge on the toe for the right needle. Now this is again going to just skim off a similar amount to doing that 3/8 inch seam allowance with the 4 thread overlock, but the stitching line will be skinnier. And if it holds true for what I said the first time with the left and right needles in, the edge of my fabric is going to really align with the edge of the knife, this side of the edge of the knife. So let's go with this. I'm going to throw this little piece away so I don't confuse the issue or myself. Okay, and let me just trim off the thread tail, get that out of the way. And I'm grabbing my little scrap out of my trim bin, and we're going to go over to the table again. Okay, so here we have the 3/8 inch seam allowance. Let me get this out of the way. And here is what I trimmed off. And I can kind of tell the edge that was trimmed because it's much cleaner. You can see the little threads on this edge where the fabric was a little bit frayed. So let's get this right up against that. It's a little bit fussy. Let me see if I can get that. I think that's correct. And let's measure right on the money, 3/8 of an inch. So that is kind of a quick, easy way to see the difference. Oh, and you know what? I didn't throw this one away. So let's just do a comparison of how much we cut off, whether we're using the 5/8 inch seam allowance or the 3/8. Here are the two different pieces. I'm going to put them side by side. Okay, so this one with the 5/8 inch seam allowance, I cut off considerably more than with the 3/8 inch seam allowance, which seems, it almost seems counterintuitive, but when you put them up next to the fabric that was stitched, it does make sense. So we're stitching in farther for that 5/8 inch seam allowance than the 3/8 inch seam allowance, and then we're just trimming off that little bit. So there's a considerable difference. But what you can see is that they're both the same. Well, let me line these edges up so you can see they're both very consistent in the thickness of the width of what I cut off. So that is that. Now, can you do that with a serger straight stitch? Absolutely you can. And what is a serger straight stitch? It's the chain stitch. So you don't necessarily have to have your cover stitch table set up on your machine. You can stitch with the knife up with that if you're creating a seam. And I think you've heard me say this in my Decode the Stitch class, and I've mentioned it in cover stitch class as well, that especially if you are a garment sewer, nobody would think to use their serger for fitting. But if you use a chain stitch for your fitting to decide, do I need to take something in, let it out a little bit, you can zip that chain stitch out lickety-split without any snagging of your fabric with a seam ripper. You do not even need your seam ripper with that. So I'm going to just change from overlock mode into cover stitch mode. I'm just looking at the time. We've got plenty of time. But before I leave overlock mode, does anyone need anything clarified on that, or do they need to see anything again on the machine? I just want to make sure everybody's got this, because it does seem to be something that is a concept that really, you have to really think about it. And I know I did. When I was newer to sergers, I didn't quite understand that if the stitch itself, the edge of the stitch isn't 5/8 of an inch from the edge anymore, how could that possibly be a 5/8 inch seam allowance, 1/2 inch, 3/8, 1/4 inch, whatever. But oh, you know what? One thing I do want to show you. I'm going to bring my stitch width down to 6 millimeters wide, which is a perfect 1/4 inch seam allowance. And now I would only be skimming off the whiskers on it. And I didn't mark my fabric yet for that, because I did want to show that to you. I'm just getting my, fortunately I cut enough little pieces of this fabric to show you this. But this is really good to know. A lot of bag patterns, a lot of patterns have a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and you can do that with your serger. Okay, Pam, you're right on the money. I'm going to show you that 1/4 inch seam allowance right now, okay? So, alrighty, let me go to my table camera. I'm going to move these out of the way. All right, so what I'm going to do here, and again, I just am using a ballpoint pen just so it'll show up. Okay, so let me get this. I'm just going to put this mark. This is padded, so I got to see if I can make this mark show up. Hang on. Okay, let's see. All right, So there's my mark for a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I've got my right needle in. It really, it wouldn't matter so much whether you're using your right needle or your right and left needles, as long as whichever one that's forming the seam is lined up with this. But what I'm going to do is I am going to bring my stitch width dial, and I'm going to open up the machine so that you can see exactly what I'm doing. Here's my knife. Let me put my, oh, wait a minute, I guess I better, everybody's very good, but they can't see if it's not on. I'm going to put my light on just so you can see this more clearly. Okay, so there's that. I think that shows up. So here is my knife right here. I'm going to lower this exposure so it's not so glary. Okay, here is my stitch finger. Right now, I had my stitch width, I mentioned it at the beginning, on 7.5 millimeters wide. Now, for a perfect 1/4 inch seam in overlock mode, I am going to bring my stitch width down to 6. And I'm going to put my left needle back in because that 6 millimeter width is with the left needle in. So I'll just quickly rethread this. You're going to get a very good view of my fingers here. Okay. And let me rethread that left needle. Just working around my camera a little bit. Okay, so I want to show you what I did. When I brought that down, what I wanted you to see is the stitch finger and the knife moved in closer to the needles. So the width of the stitch is going to be narrower to start with. When I go all the way out to 9, this is kind of what I do in Serger Essentials. That stitch finger and the knife are farther away. And so let me go to me for just a second just to clear that up. So if these are the needles and the stitch finger is over here, the width of the stitch is going to be as wide as the space between my hands. When I bring that stitch finger in and the knife closer to the needles, it skinnies down the stitch. So that's exactly what so that's exactly what I want to show you. So I'm up to 9 now. Let me put my camera back on right here. And let's bring that stitch finger and knife in for a 6 millimeter wide stitch. So it's brought right down to here, okay? And my dial for doing that is right below the table. It's right on the front bottom of my machine. So that's where I am using the dial. For other brands of machine, for Baby Lock and maybe some other machines, the stitch width is the little knob with the gray whorl on it that goes skinny to fat, and the wider the whorl is, that gray whorl, the wider the stitch, and you have those numbers that are in pairs. Bobby, you're saying you get ads. Are they playing right now? They shouldn't be. I think the only way people can turn ads off on YouTube is with YouTube Premium, which you get charged for. I don't know how much it is. I don't have it. But if you have YouTube Premium, I think that will eliminate playing the ads for you. Okay, so let's close this up. Now, if you're a quilter and or you're making something like pillows or bags or something, anything with a 1/4 inch seam, you can do that in overlock mode as well as cover stitch mode with the left needle in and your stitch width set to 6. So I'm going to do that right now. I have my 1/4 inch mark right at the top. Now with this one, I'm going to put my trim bin back on and go to my foot. There we go. Let me shut this light off again so that it doesn't glare, and brighten it up a little bit. I think that's good for everybody. Okay, so I am putting that mark on my fabric aligned with the left overlock needle indicator ridge right here. And you'll see the edge of the fabric really is just kind of kissing the knife. It's not, I might skim off the whiskers, but I'm not going to trim off anything more than the whiskers for that perfect 1/4 inch seam. So just because the knife is there doesn't mean you have to trim off anything, but it's great for skimming off the whiskers and just cleaning up, especially if you've got a fabric that frays easily and is really thready on the edge. So let's give this a go. And for this, all I'm doing is I'm just making sure that the edge of the fabric is kissing the knife as it goes by. Okay, so, and let's measure this seam allowance just to see if we are on the money for a 1/4 inch seam. Get my little threads out of the way here. Here it is, 1/4 inch, exactly a 1/4 inch. Can you see that? Let me tip that ruler just a little bit. It's a little bit glary. But that is a perfect 1/4 inch seam allowance with the stitch width set on 6 and my left needle in. Now, if you were doing that with strictly your right needle in, you'd have to just do a little bit of adjusting on that to get it exactly right. And you'd probably want to move your knife and stitch finger over just a hair. Yeah, Pam, it is really nice and easy. You're absolutely right. And a lot of times people think that doing a 1/4 inch seam on your serger is going to be super bulky. But with a 4 thread overlock, because you've got that right needle in, those threads really compress those stitches a lot. And especially if you're working on something like, say, a pillow with upholstery fabric or anything like that, it's really maybe almost a little bit flatter than if you did it on your sewing machine. And I find, and I don't know whether it's because I'm not really a quilter or not, but I find it's easier to keep a consistent 1/4 inch seam allowance on my serger because I have those 2 sets of feed dogs that really make feeding the fabric accurately easy. On your sewing machine, you just have 1 set of feed dogs and a shorter presser foot. So you can definitely do it. Obviously, people do it all the time with a 1/4 inch foot and stay very consistent. But I do find, even with my seam guide in, I like the consistency that those 2 sets of feed dogs give me. But now I want to go and switch over to a cover stitch. So I am going to cut all of my threads. And we're going to do a chain stitch. So we're just going to use 2 threads. Let me open this up. I'm going to pull out all of these threads, get rid of this. I'm going to lock my upper looper down. I'm going to leave my knife up though. Let's leave that knife up. Because I'm not going to put my cover hem table on. If I were using my cover hem table, I would have to lock that down as well because it would hit it and bump it. So now I'm going to switch my lower looper thread into my chain looper. I have my air threading. And I think you'll see the thread come out right here. And let me put my light on just so you can see it if you haven't seen that, if you're not familiar with air threading. Okay. Oh, let me get this out of here. Let me get a hold of my thread a little bit better. Wait a minute. Oh, here we go. Okay. All right. So now my chain looper is all threaded. I can click that back. My upper looper is now locked down. When I turn the hand wheel, you can see it's locked. So it's not going to bump the table. I've got to switch. I'm going to switch out my needle. Now, for the chain stitch to be in a perfect position for a 1/4 inch seam, I need my cover chain stitch foot, and I should have had that out. Let me look to see, where did I put that darn thing? Here it is. Okay, good. All right. My cover chain stitch foot is the nice little narrow one. All right, that comes with the machine. Let me put this. And what I'm going to do, I just want to show you my full setup. I'm going to switch my needle, and I'm only using 1 needle because it is a chain stitch. I am putting that in the center chain stitch position, the center needle for cover chain stitch mode. So let me get that. Okay, so that's in. Let me snug it up. Alrighty. Okay, and get my thread. And I'm going to go to, I'm just going to put it on 16, stitch number 16, which is the chain stitch. Bring it through. Got it in the wrong tension. Wait a minute, hang on a second. My mistake. No matter what needle position in chain stitch you're in, your threading on that needle is always going through the yellow threading route, okay? It's always a little bit of a trick working around the camera. Okay, I think I'm good. I'm going to double check. Anytime I change stitches or the stitching mode, I want to test it on my scrap fabric to make sure it's okay. And I'll just take one of the ones that I already stitched on just to make sure my stitching looks correct. And I'm closing up that front door. I brought my stitch with, oh, let me change my foot too. I knew that didn't look quite right. This is like a little springy thing on the edge. Get that out. I'm going to put on my cover chain stitch foot. Okay. Now, when I am in cover chain stitch mode, I'm going to I am going to shut that light off again. Okay. So when I am in covered chain stitch mode, in order for me to get a perfect 1/4 inch seam, I have my needle in the center chain needle position. I've got my narrow covered chain stitch foot on. And what I'm going to do is let me go back to me for a second. We've got a few minutes left. Okay, I think we'll be right on time. Okay, so here's my last scrap of fabric. I'm going to mark a 1/4 inch from that edge, just like you saw me do before. Get my edges lined up. Here's my 1/4 inch. Okay, so there's my 1/4 inch. And this is going to be with a chain stitch. I'm going to put that down here so you'll see it. Okay. And let's go to the machine and see how to set this up. All right. So you can see that this foot is considerably narrower. Now, if I'm not going to trim off anything on this, only because I don't have to really worry about where that is. So I can even put my knife down, I guess, for this demo. But what I'm doing is, I think you can see, let me take my little stiletto here. You can see the mark is lined up with that center needle position. And the edge of my fabric is aligned up with the edge of the presser foot. And this is a great guide for cover chain stitch mode 1/4 inch seams. So as long as I keep the edge of my fabric aligned with the right edge of the presser foot, I'm going to be good to go. I've got a stitch length of 3.0. I'm going to bring it up to about 3.5. This is just a sample, so it doesn't really matter. And let me just show you that setup on the screen just so that you can see it and you're clear on it. Okay, so now I'm set up for a 2-thread chain stitch. So this is saying right chain needle, but I have the center one in, but my threading is through that yellow threading route and my chain looper is set up, and those are auto set tensions. It's really interesting when I am in cover chain stitch mode, even when I'm using decorative threads, most of the time, I don't have to adjust my tensions, which I think is really interesting with multiple 12-weight threads or 8-weight threads versus Serger cone thread. So let's go and take a look at stitching a perfect 1/4 inch seam in cover chain stitch mode. I've got my fabric aligned exactly with that. And did I test this? No. Let me test it first on a scrap fabric, make sure my stitch looks good. I always do this just for a little bit of insurance. I'm just pulling it out. And that stitch looks perfect. Pretty much per usual for the machine. All right, now I've got my fabric aligned perfectly. And let me bring my needle up so you can see the mark peeking through where the needle positions are, right in here. All right, so I'm going to get my needle right on that mark, and I'm going to stitch a perfect 1/4 inch seam in covered chain stitch mode with the Serger straight stitch. And let's go over to the table and measure this. Okay, get my pen out of the way. Absolutely perfect. There's your 1/4 inch. Let me lift that up so there's no glare on it. You can see that is a perfect 1/4 inch seam. Now, are there any questions at all about that? That presser foot is really great, and it's also excellent for zipper insertion because it's so streamlined and narrow. It's considerably narrower than the utility, the standard foot, which is for cover and cover stitch and overlock modes. This is strictly for cover chain stitch mode. So it's a fantastic foot because you can get in close to zippers. You can use the edge of the foot for a perfect 1/4 inch seam with a chain stitch. So fantastic for that. Oh, Amy, you're welcome for that. So are there any more questions about seam allowance? I really hope that by being able to do this live, that I could clear that up for a lot of people, because it just seems to be a continuing issue with people and trying to understand that. And I do get it, believe me, I do. So also, just one last thing. I know I'm 2 minutes overtime here, but one last thing. Our vacuums, I believe, are going to be shipping the first set of people who pre-ordered. I think that shipment is about 60 vacuums. I think they will be shipping around August 16th. Oh, Pamela, thank you. I'm glad it was helpful for you. So those will be shipping, and then the next shipment is coming in, I'm not quite sure, like a few days later or something. And so those will be shipped as they come in. And for anyone who's interested in that, if you want to shoot me an email and say, what is the link, I can send that to you. Maybe we can even put it, maybe we can even add it in after this is done if you're interested in purchasing it. I don't like this to be a big commercial. Donna, you're new to serging and have a Baby Lock Triumph. Okay, so Donna, on your Baby Lock Triumph, when you want to adjust your stitch width, that is that little knob on the side that is above the big knob that does your stitch length, that has the double set of the 1, 2, 3, 4. Your stitch width is that small knob that has the gray whorl on it. And when you bring that down to the 1/4 inch one, you'll get a good stitch. In overlock, you'll put your stitch width right on 6. And you want to test it. Sometimes there can be little variations in the width of the stitch depending on whether you have a Baby Lock, a Bernina, a Janome, a Viking, whatever, a Juki. So do test it and measure it just to be sure that for your machine, you're on the money. And once you have it set, you could either make a little mark on the knob or just commit it to memory. So you'll be good to go on that. Anyway, I don't see any other questions. So I think we're good for today. And yay, I'm so glad I'm back in the groove for my second Tuesday of the month for Serger Savvy. This is fantastic. And thank you all for joining me. If you think of questions after we sign off, which is going to be momentarily, just shoot me an email, gail@gailpatrice.com. If you are thinking about buying a machine, anything, you have that $100 rebate on your purchase, or software also. So Tina, you're welcome. But thank you all. I hope you all have a great day. Stay cool if it's hot where you are, and enjoy it. Sewing is a great way to stay cool. All right. Thanks, everyone. Take care, and I'll see you the next time.